Hey, I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. Give this video a like.
Podcast below in the description. Subscribe to that as well.
And check out deck.com/ham. Deck makes organizing, accessing, protecting, and securing everything you need so much easier. Look at this, John.
Deck.com/ham for our grinders out there and our tailgaters. Can make tailgating easy. Deck.com/ham. Free shipping. Check it out.
Mike McDaniel talked about him when he spoke last week on, what was that, Wednesday? After the Niners canceled OTAs, the Niners' new offensive coordinator, Mike McDaniel, still talked. Again, I'll say it. He's a gem. DeMeco talked, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Kyle Shanahan on Tim Kawakami's podcast talked about DeMeco as well. In a day and age when Sean McVay's having every offensive play caller on his podcast, is DeMeco Ryans flying a little bit beneath the radar?
Well, if DeMeco was the equivalent, not the equivalent, if he just was an OC, not a DC, I think he'd be a much bigger story in the league. He finished playing in 2015. He's a defensive coordinator in 2021. When I was with the Eagles, we traded for him, and he immediately became our team captain. We loved him. Now, part of the reason he was available, he had torn his Achilles a year before, or a couple years before. He wasn't the same player. When he came into the league, he was Defensive Rookie of the Year. But like the vibe around him just immediately spread. He's like one of the highest level guys in the league. It was like he was just like that was the type guy you wanted around on your team. Honestly, spoken about like a patriot. Like that's the way people thought of him. And clearly, like look at who likes him, Kyle. Right? I mean, it's just. But everyone did. I mean, Andy loved him. That's why he wanted him. And part of it was like we didn't think we'd get Luke Kuechly in the draft. Needed a middle linebacker. Obviously, Luke Kuechly I think went 8 to the Panthers, so we made the move before the draft. And I just remember he got in there and everyone loved him. And he ended up playing for the Eagles for like 3 years after the torn Achilles. And we know when we saw Navarro, a torn Achilles for a middle linebacker, it is a tough injury to overcome, I would say, for guy, especially the way the league is sideline to sideline. But one thing he mentioned on his press conference, rewatching it the other day, I was watching it for the first time because that was the practice we went to, was like he knew he was going to be a coach at a pretty young age, which most players, and again, this guy, I Wikipedia'd it, like when he got his second contract, but you told me he was the 33rd pick in the draft. So like when you're the 33rd pick in the draft, he got a $3 or $4 million contract. He then signed another contract, I think in 09 or 10 for like, it was 21.8 guaranteed and $50 million contract. But it's a big NFL contract. He was thinking about being a coach, and he was that level of a player before that, right? SEC Player of the Year. We just don't care. I mean, we do, because we talk a lot about the Niners, we care. But like the league as a whole, in terms of buzz, if DeMeco Ryan was Ryan Fitzpatrick, or just who you insert quarterback, because that's equivalent what he was like as a middle linebacker, right? Like if Luke Kuechly just became a defensive coordinator, which he easily could, it'd be a big deal. But if the Luke Kuechly equivalent was a quarterback and became an offensive coordinator, wouldn't that be one of the biggest stories in the league? Right? Who would Luke Kuechly's be like Aaron Rodgers or something? It'd be nuts. It never happens.
Yeah, let's just say, like, to me, when a McCown became a high school coach, it was a big story.
If Phillip Rivers became a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a perfect comp for DeMeco, but let's just say Carson Palmer is the offensive coordinator for the 49ers.
How big of a story would that be if Carson Palmer was the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks and Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll? Wouldn't that be a fucking massive story? But I think this would have been a much bigger deal, like in the 90s, when it was just like, run the ball, play D. Because like the defensive coordinators were the stars. Now it's just like everyone's like, tell us more about Kingsbury. Like they don't even, that's just the way the league is. But when I just was thinking about it, it's pretty nuts. This guy stopped playing in 2015, and he's a defensive coordinator. Like that's we talk a lot about like fast rises. Like it took Kyle 20 years, right? Started coaching immediately after he was done playing, like 01, 02.
Yeah,
DeMeco just boom and going.
He became a defensive coordinator faster than Mike Vrabel became a defensive coordinator. Remember, Vrabel went to Ohio State. Vrabel's last year was in 10 with the Chiefs. Then he goes to Ohio State. Then he's the D-line coach at Ohio State for a couple of years. So he's at Ohio State for 3 years. Then he's the Texans linebacker coach for 2. Then he's their DC for 1 year, and then he becomes the Titans head coach. So it was a very fast ascension to head coach and a pretty fast ascension to defensive coordinator. But DeMeco has gotten to defensive coordinator faster than Vrabel. Vrabel's a big deal. Vrabel was not as big a deal when he was the defensive coordinator either as if he had been a former quarterback turned offensive coordinator, I would say, right?
Agree.
Now, Vrabel as a head coach has become a pretty huge deal, and part of that is, he's a Bill guy. I think that also adds to it. But I think
he's won. He won. Right?
And now
Makes
he's
the playoffs.
won. That's absolutely huge. But listening to Kyle Shanahan with Kawakami, I hadn't really thought about it until I heard Mike McDaniel say something the other day, because Mike McDaniel was in Houston with Shanahan when they drafted DeMeco. They drafted Mario Williams in the first round, then they drafted DeMeco Ryan. Both of them said, McDaniel the other day and then Kyle on Kawakami's pod, that when he came in, he immediately became their leader on defense. And McDaniel made the point, as our Mike linebacker, as a rookie, he became the leader on defense. Well, guess what? He was the rookie of the year. He was a Pro Bowler. He was an All-Pro by his second year. And Shanahan said initially they kind of hit it off because Kyle was only 27. So, both young. Obviously, DeMeco's a rookie, but Kyle's a pretty young coach on that Houston staff. And I thought the most telling thing he said was that his nickname in Houston was Mufasa, because he's wise, but he's not, a look at me type leader. That's probably not a fair thing to say. He's not an overly, loud leader. His nickname was Mufasa, like, Simba's dad in The Lion King, because he is almost, I don't know if you use the word noble leader, but just he leads by example, obviously very bright, obviously a good communicator. You have to be all of those things. But what Kyle said was, it was obvious that he would be the replacement for Saleh even, a year or two ago. Like, it was clear. Kyle was pretty straightforward with Tim. He said he's going to be a head coach sooner rather than later. Like, that's what he thinks of him. Like, so he's talked, to your point, like, we haven't really talked about him this way. You and I have talked about DeMeco,
from 17 to 2020, that's how fast it became for him to be Kyle's defensive coordinator. That's pretty nuts, right?
Because this is not Kyle's side of the ball, first of all. Right.
He was a quality control guy 4 years ago.
Now he's on an island.
Again,
he's not
coach.
But again, he's not Kyle's offensive coordinator where Kyle can help him. Like, he's on an island. Like, you can promote Mike McDaniel, quote unquote, before he's ready to be an offensive coordinator. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but ultimately Kyle calls the plays, right? Even Mike McDaniel said the other day, my role hasn't changed, really.
No.
I have a new title.
I bet Mike's been doing powerful shit for Kyle since he was like 25, right? Clearly, he goes around with him everywhere. I bet he's like, actually, when I was a quality control guy, they used 7 of my plays in a playoff game. I bet you get some of those information. Where DeMeco, it's just, you're getting yelled at by Kyle to fix it or do something different, but ultimately you're doing it, right? He's the head coach of the defense.
Comment on YouTube, Leftwich. Sorry, this is Jim. Leftwich probably the closest comp. Yeah, so Leftwich finished playing in 12, started coaching quarterbacks in 17. That is a good comp. It does feel like it's a matter of time before he's a head coach in the NFL. Maybe he's the Bucs' next head coach. I don't know what that 5-year was. What was he doing in that 5-year window? But the bottom, that is a good comp. That's another example.
Yeah, but
I would say Leftwich is not as good of a pro as DeMeco.
Never was a Pro Bowler. Never was an All-Pro. Wasn't Rookie of the Year. Was a high pick.
It's hard to find these comps, and I would say maybe comp's not the right word, but that's as close as you can get. Maybe, yeah, maybe. But the point is, you and I have talked about this before when he got promoted. Like, if their defense looks like Robert Saleh's defense looked for a couple of years, then he is going to become a head coach very quickly. But I mean, Kyle Shanahan basically said as much.
And here's the other thing, that the comp is not exactly perfect, because Leftwich and Arians, clearly he's letting him call the plays now, but his head coach is a play caller at his core. So it's like you can collaborate. Like, ultimately you can collaborate with Kyle, but he's never been a defensive play caller, right? And it's like, well, I need Kyle. It's like, well, he's in the offensive meeting right now, right? It's just part of it. Like, Leftwich and Arians are probably always next to each other. Like, I think it's pretty unique.
Yeah, I'd be interested if we talk to Byron Leftwich, like, does he do anything differently than Arians would? Whereas, as an example, and he probably does, but one thing Kyle said about DeMeco was that he thinks DeMeco's going to take more chances than Robert Saleh did. His joke was Robert Saleh never lost money gambling because Robert Saleh doesn't gamble.
Well, think about this, that because Robert Saleh is not a blitz guy. DeMeco played for Wade Phillips, who was the defensive coordinator in Houston, who was a much more aggressive defensive coordinator. Now, I actually think the comp for a backup quarterback to become a coach makes a lot of sense. What do backup quarterbacks play a big role in? Helping the coach and the starting quarterback game plan. They
spend their game on the sideline watching closely, right?
It's probably a pretty smooth transition. I bet Byron Leftwich is like, actually, when I was working with Roethlisberger, we did a lot of this, and Arians, when he was the assistant coach, like I felt like I was an assistant coach, even though I was a player on the team, right? DeMeco is more. It also shows you the power of the NFL. I say this all the time, that like I think in a lot of businesses, you can control a lot of your own outcome. It's not like, well, this guy worked for. Now, I'm not saying people connection, like this guy he worked for this manager at this sales job. It obviously helps connecting. But as a player, and same as a scout, same as a coach, like Mike McDaniel just getting to get with Kyle, me getting just to I got to work for Andy Reid for 3 years. Byron Leftwich just played for the Steelers when Arians was the offensive coordinator, right? DeMeco Ryans played for the Texans when Kyle was there. Like there are things like as a player, you just obviously you don't control who drafts you, but you have no control over what coaches are there, right? It's just like that offensive coordinator becomes fucking Bruce Arians or Kyle Shanahan. It changes your life if you want to get into coaching. It really does. It's pretty freaking incredible. Like Belichick has multiple guys, multiple Fresno State people on the staff. Moses Cabrera's their strength and conditioning. Cole Popovich, I think, is our offensive line coach. These guys,
Former
when
Fresno
you
State
and me were at
offensive
Fresno
lineman.
State,
He drafted
was
Logan
offensive
Mankins.
lineman and the strength coach. Like that shit, all the connections, like obviously the Saban and the Alabama, that matters. But it's out of everyone's control. But ultimately, the web is formed. It's this weird. I have a weird fascination with it.
Go with what you know first. You trust the people you know.
But it's like Leftwich. Let's just say one day we go down as Leftwich, like, God, that guy became one of the greatest coaches to ever be a former player, right? He just goes on to be a star. He'll probably say, like, the luckiest thing I ever did was, like, Arians was my offensive coordinator. We became buddies. Changed my career.
Yeah.
Right? But what if he had worked for Freddie Kitchens or something? And it just – now, he played in the league long enough.
He might have survived. He might have been on the next staff.
But you know what I'm saying. Like, what if you just get into these situations where –
well, absolutely. That's why we were listening to the Flying. You and I have both been listening to the Flying Coach podcast with Schrager and McVay, and at the end they ask each guy for his advice, and they're always like, work hard and do. It's good advice, but it's like every guy that's been interviewed has all worked for McVay. Like they've all worked together. That hasn't hurt either. Like let's not pretend like that's a non-factor.
If I was an offensive coach, if you ask, hey Middlecoff, what's your advice? You want in the league? I would do everything humanly possible to get on the Rams or the Niners staff. It'll change your life. Because, okay, get in the league. It'd be awesome to work for the Bengals. More than likely, those guys are all going to get fired. And a couple of them are going to have to go back to Kyle or McVay. Right? Do whatever you have to do to get with Andy.